I thought this would be the happiest day of my life. After driving 740 miles from Phoenix to Portland, Oregon, my back aching from 14 hours behind the wheel, I stood outside the bridal suite at the Grand Harbor Resort with my arms full of wedding gifts and my heart full of joy. I had spent months coordinating with Sarah about this day, transferring $69,000 from my retirement savings to make her dream wedding possible. When I knocked on that door and saw my daughter's face through the crack, everything changed. Sarah stood there in her flowing ivory gown, her face going ghost white. "Mom, what are you doing here? I'm sorry, but I didn't know you were coming." The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the empty hallway, leaving me standing there like a stranger. The silence in that hallway felt deafening. I stared at the closed door, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My name is Christine, and I'm 65 years old. For the past 5 years since my husband Robert died of a heart attack, I've lived alone in our ranch house in Phoenix. I worked as a registered nurse for 40 years, pulling double shifts and weekend rotations to build the retirement nest egg that Robert and I dreamed of spending together. Sarah had always been my pride and joy. Even after she moved to Portland for college and stayed for her graduate degree in social work, we talked every Sunday without fail. She would tell me about her classes, her friends, and eventually about Marcus, the man she fell in love with during her final semester. When she called 8 months ago, breathless with excitement about their engagement, I cried tears of happiness right there in my kitchen. The wedding planning had consumed my life in the most wonderful way. Sarah would call me 2 or 3 times a week, her voice bubbling over with details about the venue, the flowers, the catering. She painted such vivid pictures that I felt like I was right there with her, choosing between cream roses and white peonies, debating whether the salmon or chicken would be better for the reception dinner. When she first mentioned the costs, my heart never hesitated. $69,000 represented most of the life insurance money Robert had left me. But what good was money if I couldn't use it to make my daughter's dreams come true? I picked up extra shifts at the hospital, working nights and weekends, until my feet swelled and my back screamed in protest. I sold Robert's vintage Mustang collection, those beautiful cars he'd restored by hand in our garage. I canceled the Mediterranean cruise I'd been planning, the one Robert and I had talked about taking for our 40th wedding anniversary. But none of that mattered because Sarah needed me. Or so I thought. Standing in that hotel corridor, I remembered our last conversation just 3 weeks ago. Sarah's voice had seemed different, more distant somehow, but I attributed it to wedding stress. She had asked about the final payment for the flowers, and I'd transferred $3,000 that same afternoon. She'd thanked me quickly and hung up, saying she had to run to a dress fitting. Now, as I stood there with my hands shaking, I heard voices coming from behind the bridal suite door. I moved closer, my nurse's training making me naturally quiet on my feet. A woman's voice, professional and crisp, was speaking to someone inside. "Sarah, honey, I need to confirm the guest count one more time. You mentioned your mother's situation earlier. Will she be attending the ceremony?" My breath caught in my throat. My mother's situation. Sarah's voice came through clearly. "No, she lives far away in Arizona and we're not really close. She couldn't afford to make the trip, and honestly, she's not really involved in my life anymore. It's better this way." The wedding coordinator's voice was understanding. "I completely get it, sweetie. Some family relationships are just complicated. It's your day and you should be surrounded only by people who truly support you." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Couldn't afford to make the trip. Not involved in her life, I had literally funded this entire wedding. I had been planning this trip for months, booking the hotel room, requesting time off work, even buying a new dress specifically for this occasion. I found the wedding coordinator in the lobby 20 minutes later, her clipboard full of last-minute details. She was a pleasant woman in her 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm Christine, Sarah's mother. I think there might be some confusion about my attendance today." The woman's face registered genuine surprise. "Oh my goodness, you're Sarah's mother, but she told me you weren't able to come. She said you lived too far away and that you two weren't close. My hands clenched at my sides. I drove here from Phoenix. I've been helping plan and pay for this wedding for 8 months. The coordinator looked genuinely confused. That's so strange. Sarah told me she and Marcus were handling everything themselves. She seemed proud of how independent they were being. She never mentioned any family financial help. As the truth began to crystallize in my mind, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my daughter had been a carefully constructed lie. Sarah hadn't just forgotten to mention my attendance, she had actively told people I wasn't involved in her life. While I had been sacrificing my comfort and my savings to make her dreams come true, she had been painting me as an absent, uninvolved mother who couldn't even afford to attend her wedding. The betrayal cut deeper than Robert's death, deeper than any physical pain I'd endured in my 65 years. But as I stood there in that hotel lobby, something inside me shifted. The tears I expected didn't come. Instead, a cold, calculating clarity settled over me like a familiar uniform. I had been a nurse for 4 decades. I knew how to assess a situation, make a plan, and execute it with precision. Sarah wanted to play games with the truth fine, but she was about to learn that her mother hadn't survived 40 years in a hospital by being naive or weak. Despite every instinct telling me to drive straight back to Phoenix, I stayed. I booked a room at a modest inn 2 miles from the resort, far enough away to avoid any uncomfortable encounters before the ceremony. I needed to understand what was happening here, and running away would only give Sarah and Marcus exactly what they apparently wanted. The wedding ceremony took place at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the resort's garden pavilion. I arrived early and chose a seat in the very back behind a large pillar that mostly concealed me from view. I watched my daughter walk down that aisle looking absolutely radiant in the dress we had discussed in detail over 3 phone calls. The ivory silk gown with hand-beaded bodice had cost $4,000 money I had transferred to her account in February. Marcus stood at the altar looking handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo. At 28, he was 3 years younger than Sarah, with dark hair and confident posture. During our few phone conversations, he had seemed polite enough, though I always felt like there was something calculated about his responses to my questions. As I watched them exchange vows, I noticed Marcus's family filled the first 3 rows on the groom's side. They were clearly well-dressed, the kind of people who belonged to country clubs and drove luxury cars. His mother wore a designer suit that probably cost more than I made in a month at the hospital, and his father had the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. The ceremony was beautiful, elegant, and expensive. Every detail shouted money, from the cascading floral arrangements to the string quartet playing classical music. I calculated costs in my head, automatically a habit from years of managing household budgets. The flowers alone must have cost $8,000. The venue rental probably ran $15,000 for the day. The catering for 200 guests would easily hit $25,000. After the ceremony, guests moved to the cocktail hour on the resort's terrace. I lingered near the bar, nursing a glass of wine and observing. That's when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. Marcus stood with 3 other young men near the infinity pool, their voices carrying across the water. They were clearly his groomsmen, all dressed in matching gray suits and holding craft cocktails. "Dude, Sarah looks incredible," one of them said. "And this whole setup is amazing. You guys really went all out." Marcus laughed a sound that made my skin crawl. Sarah's finally learning to set boundaries with her needy mother. The woman actually drove here from Arizona uninvited. Can you believe the audacity? Another groomsman chuckled. "Yikes, that's awkward. What did Sarah do?" "Exactly what we practiced," Marcus replied smugly. "Told her she didn't know she was coming and shut the door. We've been working on helping Sarah understand that just because someone birthed you doesn't mean they get to control your life forever." My wine glass nearly slipped from my hand. Practiced working on helping Sarah understand. A third groomsman raised his glass. "Here's to Marcus for helping Sarah break free from toxic family dynamics." "Honestly," Marcus continued, Her mother thinks that throwing money at everything gives her the right to be involved in every decision. Sarah was so enmeshed with her before I came along. It's taken months to help her see how unhealthy that relationship really was. I set my wine glass down on the nearest table with shaking hands. The casual cruelty in Marcus's voice, the way he talked about me like I was some kind of burden Sarah needed to escape from, made my vision blur with rage. I walked over to where Marcus stood my nurse's training, keeping my expression neutral, despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "Marcus," I said pleasantly, "congratulations on your beautiful wedding. I'm Christine, Sarah's mother." The color drained from his face, and his groomsmen suddenly found their drinks very interesting. "Oh," he stammered, "Christine, I didn't realize you were here." "Clearly," I replied, maintaining my warm tone, "I wanted to thank you personally for allowing me to contribute to this wonderful celebration. The $69,000 I sent really helped make this day special, didn't it?" Marcus's eyes widened, and I saw something flicker across his face that looked almost like panic. Then his expression hardened, and he leaned closer to me. "Listen, Christine," he said quietly, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. "She thinks $69,000 guarantees your presence at every major event in her life. That's exactly the kind of toxic thinking we're trying to break here. Sarah is an adult, and she gets to choose who she wants in her life without feeling guilty about money." The words hit me like a physical blow. My financial help given out of pure love and excitement for my daughter's happiness was being reframed as manipulation and control. "I see," I said slowly. "And whose idea was it to help Sarah see things this way?" Marcus straightened his shoulders. "Sarah came to these realizations herself through therapy and personal growth. I just supported her journey toward independence." But I could see the lie in his eyes. This wasn't Sarah's journey toward independence. This was Marcus systematically isolating her from her support system, starting with me. As the cocktail hour continued, I mingled quietly with other guests, introducing myself simply as Sarah's mother when anyone asked. The reactions were telling. Several people expressed surprise that I was there, saying they thought Sarah's family lived out of state and wasn't involved. Others seemed confused, mentioning that Sarah had talked about planning and paying for the wedding herself. Then I met Patricia Marcus's aunt, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and genuine warmth. "You must be so proud," she said, clasping my hands. "Sarah is such a lovely girl, and the way she and Marcus found that beautiful house with such a substantial down payment shows real financial responsibility." My blood went cold. "Down payment?" "Oh, yes," Patricia continued innocently. "Marcus mentioned they put down 30% on their new home. In this Portland market, that must have been quite a chunk of money. Smart young people saving up like that. 30% down on a Portland house would easily be $70,000 to $80,000. My $69,000 hadn't gone to wedding expenses at all. It had gone directly into their home purchase, while Marcus's family had likely funded the actual wedding. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was uglier than I had imagined. Sarah hadn't just been lying about our relationship, she had been lying about everything. The reception began at 7 o'clock in the resort's grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory linens and adorned with towering centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus. I found my way to a table near the back, where I was seated with what appeared to be distant relatives and family friends who didn't quite fit into the main social circles. Throughout dinner, I maintained perfect composure. I smiled at the appropriate moments, applauded during the toasts, and even laughed at the best man's jokes. But internally, I was documenting everything. I discreetly took photos of the elaborate floral arrangements, the expensive linens, the premium bar service. Every detail represented money that Marcus's family had spent, while my contribution had been funneled elsewhere. During the salad course, I struck up a conversation with Patricia, who was seated at the table next to mine. "Patricia, you mentioned Marcus and Sarah's house earlier," I said casually. "Are they staying in Portland long term?" Her face lit up. Oh, they found the most wonderful place in the Pearl District. Marcus was so smart about the whole process. He told me they'd been saving every penny for 2 years to make such a large down payment. The house was $850,000, so they put down over $250,000. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. $250,000. That was nearly 4 times what I had sent. That's quite impressive for such young people, I managed. Marcus comes from good financial stock, Patricia said proudly. His father taught him early about real estate investment, though I was surprised they didn't ask family for help with the down payment. The boy's always been independent to a fault. So Marcus's family didn't even know about my money. Sarah and Marcus had presented my $69,000 as their own savings, taking credit for financial responsibility they hadn't actually demonstrated. As dinner progressed, I noticed Sarah making frequent trips to the restroom. The third time she got up, I followed at a discreet distance. The ladies' room was elegantly appointed with marble countertops and soft lighting. I was washing my hands when Sarah emerged from one of the stalls looking pale. "Sarah," I said gently. She startled, then her face hardened. "Mom, what are you doing here? I told you earlier." "I know what you told me," I interrupted softly, "but I'm here now and I'd like to understand what's happening." Sarah moved to the sink next to mine, avoiding eye contact in the mirror. "Nothing's happening. I just think it's time for me to have some independence from family." "Independence," I repeated carefully. "Is that why you told the wedding coordinator that I couldn't afford to come?" Her reflection went rigid. "I never said that." "Yes, you did. You also told her we weren't close and that I wasn't involved in your life." I kept my voice calm, professional. "Sarah, I sent you $69,000 over the past 8 months. I worked extra shifts and sold your father's cars to help pay for this wedding. How is that not being involved?" Sarah's hands gripped the marble counter. "Mom, you don't understand. Marcus has helped me see that the way you give money isn't healthy. It comes with expectations and strings attached." "What strings?" I asked genuinely. "When did I ever demand anything in return for helping you?" "It's not that simple," she said, her voice getting defensive. "It's about emotional manipulation. When you give that much money, it creates an obligation. It makes me feel guilty if I don't include you in everything." I stared at my daughter's reflection, seeing Marcus's words coming out of her mouth. "Who taught you to think that way, Sarah?" Before she could answer, the bathroom door opened and another wedding guest entered. Sarah quickly touched up her lipstick and left without another word. I remained at the sink for a few more minutes, processing what I'd heard. My daughter had been convinced that my love and support were actually forms of manipulation. Someone had systematically reframed every act of generosity as a tool of control. When I returned to the reception, I noticed Sarah at a table with her college friends. I recognized one of them, Emma, from photos Sarah had shown me over the years. Emma had been Sarah's roommate and closest friend throughout graduate school. During a quiet moment in the music, I approached their table. "Emma," I said warmly, "it's so wonderful to finally meet you in person. Sarah has told me so much about you over the years." Emma's face brightened immediately. "Mrs. Patterson? Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you could make it. I was worried when Sarah said you might not be able to come." Interesting phrasing. Might not be able to come, not that I wasn't invited. "Well, I'm here now," I said. "Sarah looks absolutely beautiful tonight." "She really does," Emma agreed. "And Marcus seems so happy, though I have to admit I was surprised by some of the things Sarah's been saying lately about family relationships." My pulse quickened. "Oh!" Emma looked uncomfortable, glancing around to make sure Sarah wasn't within earshot. "She's been talking a lot about setting boundaries with family members who use money to control relationships. I mean, I understand toxic family dynamics, but from everything she'd told me about you before, you seemed like such a supportive mom." "Things change," I said carefully. "People grow and see situations differently." "I guess," Emma said, though she looked unconvinced. "It just seemed sudden, 6 months ago she was so excited about you helping with the wedding. Then she started seeing this therapist that Marcus recommended, and suddenly everything was different." A therapist that Marcus recommended. Another piece of the puzzle. Well, I said, I'm just happy she's found someone who makes her feel secure and loved. Emma nodded, but something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced that Marcus was providing the kind of security Sarah needed. As the evening wore on, I continued gathering information. I learned that Marcus worked for a tech startup downtown, though several people seemed vague about exactly what he did there. His college friends mentioned student loans and the challenges of getting established in Portland's expensive market. Everything I heard contradicted the image of the financially successful young man who could save over $200,000 in 2 years. Near the end of the reception, I witnessed something that made my blood run cold. I was returning from the restroom when I saw Sarah and Marcus having what appeared to be an intense conversation near the hotel's business center. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught fragments. I told you to handle this, Marcus was saying, his voice sharp. I tried, but she's here now and asking questions about the money, Sarah replied, sounding stressed. This is exactly why we need to move faster with the timeline, Marcus said. The longer she has to think about things, the more complicated this gets. Timeline move faster with what timeline? I retreated before they could see me, but their words echoed in my mind. There was a timeline, a plan that my unexpected presence was threatening to disrupt. As I drove back to my hotel that night, I realized that everything I had witnessed pointed to a level of deception far more sophisticated than I had initially understood. This wasn't just about Sarah distancing herself from me. It was about Marcus orchestrating a complete financial and emotional separation while positioning himself as her savior. But I had spent 4 decades dealing with life and death situations in hospital settings. I knew how to stay calm under pressure, how to gather information systematically, and how to act decisively when the stakes were high. Sarah and Marcus thought they were dealing with a lonely, emotional mother who could be easily dismissed and discarded. They were about to discover that they had severely underestimated their opponent. The real game was just beginning. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I sat in my hotel room with my laptop, a cup of coffee, and a legal pad, beginning the most important investigation of my life. By sunrise, I had a plan that would have made my late husband proud. Robert had always said I had the patience of a saint and the strategic mind of a chess master. The first step was understanding exactly who Marcus was, beyond the charming facade he presented to my daughter. I started with public records. Oregon's property database showed that Marcus and Sarah had indeed purchased a house in the Pearl District for $850,000 just 3 months ago. The down payment was $275,000, which meant they had claimed to have significantly more savings than even my $69,000 could provide. A deeper dive into court records revealed something fascinating. Marcus had been involved in a civil lawsuit 2 years earlier with someone named Jennifer Walsh. The case had been sealed, but the filing date corresponded with the end of an engagement announcement I found in Portland's society pages. Marcus had been engaged to Jennifer, daughter of a prominent local real estate developer, and the engagement had ended abruptly. It took me 3 phone calls and some creative storytelling, but I managed to get Jennifer's current phone number from a mutual college acquaintance. She was now married and living in Seattle. Jennifer, I said when she answered, "This is Christine Patterson. I know this might sound strange, but my daughter just married your ex-fiancé Marcus, and I have some concerns about their relationship." There was a long pause. "Are you calling to warn me about something?" "Actually, I was hoping you might warn me." Another pause, then Jennifer's voice became very serious. "Can we talk in person? This isn't really a phone conversation." 2 days later, I was sitting across from Jennifer in a coffee shop in downtown Seattle. She was a beautiful woman in her early 30s, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of generational wealth, but her eyes held a wariness that I recognized immediately. "I should start by saying that I have a restraining order against Marcus," Jennifer began. "It expires next month, but it's been the most peaceful year of my life." My coffee cup rattled against the saucer. "A restraining order." Jennifer nodded grimly. "Marcus has a very specific pattern. He targets women who have strong family support systems and financial resources. Then he systematically destroys those relationships while positioning himself as the only person who truly understands and supports his partner. She pulled out a folder from her purse. I kept documentation of everything, partly for the legal case and partly for my own sanity. May I show you some things? The folder contained printed emails, text message, screenshots, and handwritten notes. Jennifer walked me through Marcus's methodical approach to isolation. It starts gradually, she explained. He begins by asking innocent questions about your family. Why does your mother call so often? Don't you think your father is too involved in your decisions? He frames it as concern for your independence and growth. I thought about Sarah's sudden shift in perspective about my involvement in her life. Then he introduces the concept of toxic family dynamics, Jennifer continued. He'll recommend articles, books, even therapists who specialize in helping people break free from enmeshed family relationships. The therapy isn't necessarily bad advice for some people, but Marcus uses it to reframe every act of love and support as manipulation and control. Did your family help you financially? I asked. Jennifer's laugh was bitter. My father had given us $50,000 toward a house down payment. Within 6 months of dating Marcus, I was convinced that my father was trying to control my relationship through money. I actually gave the money back and told my parents I needed space from their financial manipulation. My heart sank. What happened next? Marcus convinced me to move in with him away from my support network. He handled all the finances because he was better with money and wanted to protect me from stress. I found out later that he had significant debt and had been using my name to open credit accounts. Jennifer showed me bank statements and credit reports. Marcus had systematically drained her personal savings while accumulating debt in her name. The worst part, she continued, is that he was cheating on me the entire time. I discovered he was still seeing his previous ex-girlfriend, a woman he'd done the exact same thing to. When I confronted him, he convinced me that I was being paranoid and jealous, that my family had made me too dependent and insecure to trust a good relationship. I felt sick. How did you finally break free? My sister hired a private investigator without telling me. When she presented the evidence of his affair and financial fraud, I realized that everything he'd told me about my family was a lie. My parents hadn't been trying to control me. They'd been trying to protect me from someone who was systematically destroying my life. Jennifer handed me a business card. This is the private investigator my sister used. His name is David Chen, and he specializes in financial fraud cases. If your daughter is in a similar situation, you're going to need professional help to document what's happening. As I drove back to Portland, my mind was reeling. Marcus wasn't just manipulative. He was a predator who had refined his techniques across multiple relationships. Sarah wasn't his first victim, and if I didn't act, she wouldn't be his last. Back in Portland, I hired David Chen and gave him everything I knew about Marcus's financial situation. Within a week, he had uncovered a web of deception that was breathtaking in its scope. Marcus's tech job was real, but he was barely making $40,000 a year. He had over $100,000 in student loan debt, maxed out credit cards, and a history of late payments on everything from car loans to rent. The idea that he and Sarah had saved enough money for a substantial house down payment was completely fabricated. More disturbing, David discovered that Marcus was still in contact with Jennifer, despite the restraining order using fake social media accounts to monitor her activities. He was also in communication with at least 2 other women from his past, suggesting that his behavior was compulsive rather than situational. The most damning evidence came from Marcus's computer, which David was able to access through a social engineering technique I didn't fully understand. Marcus had detailed notes about Sarah's psychology, her family relationships, and her financial resources. He had researched me extensively, learning about Robert's life insurance payout and my retirement savings. In one particularly chilling document, Marcus had created a timeline for isolating Sarah from me moving them across the country and gaining access to more of my money. The pregnancy that I suspected Sarah was hiding was part of his strategy, a way to create urgency around financial decisions while making it emotionally devastating for me to withdraw support. But the most shocking discovery was that Marcus had been intercepting some of my communications with Sarah. He had access to her email accounts and had been deleting messages from me while sending responses that Sarah never actually wrote. Some of the conversations I thought I'd had with my daughter over the past 6 months had actually been with Marcus pretending to be Sarah. As I sat in my hotel room reviewing David's findings, I felt a cold rage settle over me that I hadn't experienced since the night Robert died. Marcus hadn't just stolen my money, he had stolen my daughter's agency, her relationships, and her sense of reality. But unlike his previous victims, I wasn't going to be isolated, discredited, or dismissed. I had resources experience, and most importantly, the kind of righteous fury that comes from a mother protecting her child. Marcus had made one critical error in his assessment of me. He had assumed that because I was older, widowed, and geographically distant, I would be easy to neutralize. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he had been. The call came exactly 2 weeks after the wedding, just as David Chen had predicted it would. "Mom," Sarah's voice sounded strained, tired. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" I was sitting in my Phoenix kitchen surrounded by documents and photographs that painted a complete picture of Marcus's deception, but my voice remained warm and concerned. "Of course, sweetheart. How are you feeling? You sound exhausted." "I am," she admitted. "The house has been more work than we expected, and I've been feeling really run down lately." "Are you taking care of yourself? Getting enough rest?" There was a pause. "Actually, Mom, that's part of why I'm calling. Marcus and I have been talking, and we realized we might have been too hasty about some things after the wedding. We miss having you involved in our lives." I closed my eyes, feeling the lie hit me like a physical blow. "I miss being involved too, honey. I was hurt by what happened at the wedding, but I understand you needed space. We were wondering if you might want to come visit next month," Sarah continued. "Maybe we could have a proper celebration of the marriage and you could see our new house." "I would love that," I replied, injecting just the right amount of eager relief into my voice. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice dropping. "We've been talking about starting our family sooner than we originally planned. With the house and everything, we're realizing that having a baby is going to be more expensive than we anticipated." Here it comes, I thought. "We were wondering if you might be willing to help us with some of the initial costs, setting up a nursery medical expenses, maybe some financial cushion for when I take maternity leave." "Of course I'd want to help with my grandchild," I said softly. "How much were you thinking?" "We were hoping for around $50,000, Sarah said quickly. "I know it's a lot, but Marcus has been researching everything and the costs really add up fast." $50,000, on top of the $69,000 they'd already stolen for their house down payment. "Let me think about it," I said. "I'll need to look at my finances, but I'm sure we can work something out. When were you hoping to have this celebration visit?" "How about in 2 weeks Marcus can take some time off work and we can really spend some quality time together?" After I hung up, I sat for a long time staring at the phone. The Sarah I had just spoken with wasn't entirely my daughter. Her speech patterns, her phrasing, even the way she approached the request for money felt coached and artificial. I called David Chen immediately. "You were right," I told him. "They want $50,000 more and they're using the pregnancy to create urgency." "Are you ready to execute the plan?" he asked. "I'm ready." The plan we had developed was elegant in its simplicity. I would agree to provide the money, but I would insist on giving it to them in person during a family celebration. I would invite not just Sarah and Marcus, but their closest friends and family members under the guise of wanting to properly celebrate their marriage and impending parenthood. What they wouldn't know is that the celebration would actually be an intervention with Jennifer participating via video call, and all of Marcus's lies exposed in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to both of them. I spent the next 2 weeks in careful preparation. I confirmed that Jennifer would be available for the video call. I contacted Marcus's parents, framing the invitation as a surprise celebration that Sarah was planning for Marcus. I reached out to Emma and Sarah's other college friends, telling them that Sarah wanted to share some exciting news about their future plans. I also hired a forensic accountant to create a detailed presentation of Marcus's actual financial situation, including his debt load, his real income, and the impossibility of him having saved the money for their house down payment. Most importantly, I arranged for a family law attorney to be present at the gathering, ready to help Sarah understand her legal options if she decided to leave Marcus. The celebration was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at Sarah and Marcus's new house. I arrived early, bringing flowers, gifts, and a presentation folder that contained enough evidence to destroy Marcus's carefully constructed lies. Sarah looked beautiful but tired when she answered the door. She was definitely pregnant, probably about 3 months along, based on the subtle changes in her appearance that only a mother would notice. "Mom," she said, hugging me tightly, "I'm so glad you're here." For a moment, holding my daughter, I felt a flicker of doubt about what I was about to do. But then I saw Marcus over her shoulder, his smile cold and calculating, and I remembered Jennifer's words about the restraining order and the pattern of financial abuse. The other guests began arriving around 2 o'clock. Marcus's parents looked confused about why they had been invited to what they thought was Sarah's surprise for Marcus. Emma and the other college friends seemed excited about Sarah's mysterious announcement. When everyone had assembled in their spacious living room, I stood up with my wine glass and smiled at the group. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "Sarah and Marcus, I wanted to celebrate your beautiful marriage and share in the exciting news about your growing family." Sarah's face went white. She hadn't told anyone else about the pregnancy yet. But before we celebrate the future, I continued, "I think it's important that everyone understand the truth about how we got here." I opened my presentation folder and began laying out the evidence systematically. First, I showed the financial records proving that my $69,000 had gone toward their house, down payment not wedding expenses, as Sarah had told me. "Marcus," I said calmly, "would you like to explain to your parents how 2 young people making a combined income of less than $70,000 managed to save enough for a $275,000 down payment?" Marcus's father looked confused. "What do you mean? Marcus told us you two had been saving aggressively for years." Next, I presented the credit reports and debt analysis that David Chen had compiled. Marcus's actual financial situation was laid bare for everyone to see. Marcus owes over $100,000 in student loans and has maxed out credit cards totaling another $43,000 in debt, I explained. His annual income is $38,000, barely enough to cover his existing obligations, let alone save for a house. Emma raised her hand tentatively. "Wait, I don't understand. Sarah told us you two were doing really well financially." "That's because Marcus has been lying to Sarah about their finances, just like he's been lying to all of you," I replied. Then I connected my laptop to their television and called Jennifer via video conference. When her face appeared on their large screen, Marcus went completely pale. "Hello, Marcus," Jennifer said calmly. "I see you're still running the same game." For the next 20 minutes, Jennifer detailed Marcus's pattern of behavior, explaining how he had isolated her from her family, stolen her money, and carried on multiple affairs, while convincing her that she was paranoid and jealous. "Sarah," Jennifer said, looking directly at her through the camera, "I know this is overwhelming, but everything your mother is telling you is true. Marcus will convince you that your family is toxic and controlling, that only he truly understands you. But it's all designed to make you dependent on him, while he drains your resources and destroys your other relationships." Sarah sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. Marcus tried to interrupt several times, but I had prepared for that too. "Marcus," I said, "before you try to explain any of this away, you should know that we have copies of your computer files, including the detailed notes you made about Sarah's psychology and my financial resources. We also have evidence that you've been intercepting and responding to my emails to Sarah, pretending to be her." I handed Sarah printouts of the conversations that Marcus had fabricated, conversations where he had pretended to be her while systematically destroying our relationship. "Honey," I said gently, Half of our phone conversations over the past 6 months weren't actually with you. Marcus has been impersonating you to control the narrative and manipulate both of us." The room was completely silent except for Sarah's quiet crying. Marcus's parents looked horrified. Emma and the other friends seemed to be processing the magnitude of the deception. Finally, Marcus stood up, his charming mask completely dropped. "This is insane," he said angrily. "You're all believing a bitter old woman who can't accept that her daughter chose independence over being controlled by guilt and money." "Marcus," his father said quietly, "is any of this true?" "Of course not," Marcus snapped. "This is exactly the kind of manipulative behavior I've been helping Sarah recognize and break free from." That's when I played the recording that David Chen had obtained of Marcus, talking to his groomsmen at the wedding reception discussing his plans to isolate Sarah from her toxic mother and control the narrative about family relationships. As Marcus's own voice filled the room describing his strategy for manipulating Sarah, the last of his credibility crumbled. Sarah stood up slowly, her hands shaking. "Get out," she said quietly. "Sarah, you don't understand," Marcus began. "Get out," she screamed. "Get out of my house right now." Marcus's parents offered to drive him to a hotel. Emma and the other friends surrounded Sarah with support and comfort, and I held my daughter while she sobbed, finally understanding the full scope of how she had been betrayed. The truth was finally out, but the real work of rebuilding her life was just beginning. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of legal consultations, financial investigations, and emotional revelations. Sarah moved into a hotel room unable to bear staying in the house that had been purchased with stolen money and lies. I stayed with her, holding her hand through the worst of it. Jennifer's attorney flew down from Seattle to help Sarah understand her options. The news was both better and worse than we had hoped. The good news, Attorney Walsh explained, is that Sarah has grounds for annulment based on fraud. Marcus misrepresented his financial situation, his employment prospects, and his intentions in the marriage. Oregon law is very clear about marriages entered into under false pretenses. "What's the bad news?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "The bad news is that untangling the financial mess is going to be complicated. Marcus has been using Sarah's credit and personal information to open accounts and make purchases. Some of the damage might take years to fully reverse." The forensic accounting revealed the full scope of Marcus's deception. He had not only stolen my $69,000, but he had also been systematically draining Sarah's personal savings and using her excellent credit score to finance his lifestyle. The house, the expensive furniture, even some of his wedding expenses had been charged to accounts in Sarah's name. More disturbing, we discovered that Marcus was still in communication with his previous victims. He had been running a long-term con, maintaining relationships with multiple women while moving from one primary target to the next. "How many others are there?" Sarah asked when David Chen presented his findings. "At least 4 that we can document," David replied. "Jennifer wasn't his first victim, and you weren't going to be his last." The revelation that seemed to hit Sarah hardest was learning about the intercepted communications. Marcus had been deleting my emails and text messages while responding as her creating artificial conversations that never actually happened. "Mom," she said, reading through the fabricated exchanges, "I never wrote any of this. Some of these messages are so cold and dismissive. This isn't how I talk to you." "I know, honey," I said, stroking her hair. "I could tell something was different, but I thought you were just stressed about the wedding." "He made me believe that you were trying to control me with money," Sarah continued. "He would show me articles about toxic family dynamics and financial manipulation. He even had me seeing a therapist who specialized in helping people break free from enmeshed family relationships. The therapist was probably legitimate," Jennifer said during one of our video calls. "Marcus is smart enough to use real therapeutic concepts and twist them to serve his purposes. That's what makes him so effective." As the legal wheels began turning, Sarah made a decision that surprised me with its strength and clarity. "I want to press charges," she announced during a meeting with the district attorney's office. Not just for the financial fraud, but for everything. If he's done this to other women, he's going to keep doing it until someone stops him. The prosecutor, a woman named District Attorney Martinez, was encouraging. We have enough evidence for multiple felony charges: wire fraud, identity theft, financial elder abuse through his targeting of your mother's retirement funds, and potentially racketeering if we can prove a pattern across multiple victims. Within a week, Marcus was arrested at his temporary hotel room. The charges included wire fraud, identity, theft, financial abuse, and violation of his restraining order with Jennifer. His bail was set at $500,000, an amount his family refused to provide once they understood the full scope of his crimes. The local media picked up the story partly because of the unusual nature of the case, and partly because Marcus's family was well known in Portland's social circles. The headlines were devastating. Local tech worker arrested for marriage fraud scheme, and Portland man accused of multi-victim financial romance scam. The media attention had an unexpected benefit. 3 additional women came forward with similar stories about Marcus, providing prosecutors with even more evidence of his systematic approach to financial and emotional abuse. Sarah and I spent hours each day dealing with banks, credit agencies, and legal paperwork. The process of reversing the financial damage was exhausting, but I was amazed by my daughter's resilience and determination. I keep thinking about how he almost got away with it, she said one evening as we worked through credit card statements. If you hadn't come to the wedding, if you hadn't investigated everything, I might never have realized what was happening. You would have figured it out eventually, I assured her. You're smart and strong, Sarah. Marcus preyed on your kindness and your trust, but he couldn't have fooled you forever. I just feel so stupid, she said. All the signs were there. The way he discouraged me from talking to you, how he always wanted to handle the finances, the way he reframed every conversation about family as being about boundaries and independence. Sarah, he's a professional, Jennifer said during one of our video calls. I have a graduate degree in psychology and he fooled me for over a year. These people study human behavior specifically to exploit it. The house had to be sold, of course. The mortgage had been obtained fraudulently, and the down payment money needed to be returned to me. Sarah was heartbroken about losing the home she had thought they were building together, but she was also relieved to be free of the debt and deception it represented. Where will you live after the baby comes? I asked one day as we packed up her belongings from the house. Sarah paused, holding a photo from her college graduation. I was hoping, she said quietly, that maybe I could come home to Phoenix for a while, just until I get back on my feet and figure out what comes next. My heart swelled with relief and joy. Sarah, there's nothing I'd love more than having you and my grandchild close by. I have a lot of apologizing to do, she continued. The things I said to you, the way I treated you at the wedding. I know Marcus was manipulating me, but I still said and did those things. Honey, you don't need to apologize for being victimized by someone whose full-time job was lying to you, I replied. What matters is that we're here now working together to fix this. The trial was scheduled for 6 months later, but Marcus's attorney approached us about a plea deal within weeks of his arrest. Faced with overwhelming evidence and multiple victims willing to testify, Marcus agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence of 8 to 12 years in federal prison. He'll also have to pay restitution to all victims, District Attorney Martinez explained. Though realistically, given his financial situation, you may not recover much money through the criminal case. I don't care about the money, Sarah said firmly. I just want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. The civil cases were more promising. Marcus's family, horrified by the revelations and eager to distance themselves from his crimes, agreed to help recover some of the stolen funds. The house sale would return most of my $69,000, and Marcus's other assets would be liquidated to compensate his victims. More importantly, Sarah was building a new life based on truth, genuine relationships, and her own authentic choices. She enrolled in a doctoral program in social work at Arizona State University, specializing in financial abuse and domestic violence. Her personal experience with Marcus's manipulation had given her insights that would help other victims recognize and escape similar situations. "I want to turn this nightmare into something positive," she explained. "If my experience can help even one other woman avoid what I went through, then maybe some good can come out of all this pain." 6 months later, I stood in the nursery Sarah and I had decorated together in my Phoenix home, holding my granddaughter Emma for the first time. She was perfect with Sarah's dark hair and what I hoped were my stubborn chin and determined spirit. Sarah had given birth 2 weeks early, but both she and the baby were healthy. During labor, she had gripped my hand and said, "Mom, I'm so grateful you fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." The legal proceedings had concluded better than we had dared hope. Marcus was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $200,000 in restitution to his victims. While he didn't have the money immediately, his assets had been seized and would be distributed among the women he had defrauded. More satisfying than the financial recovery was the knowledge that Marcus's scheme had been thoroughly exposed. His story had been picked up by national media as an example of financial romance fraud, and law enforcement agencies were using his case to train officers on recognizing similar patterns. Jennifer had become an unexpected friend through all of this. She visited us in Phoenix when Emma was born, and she and Sarah had formed a bond based on their shared experience and recovery. "You know what the strangest part is?" Sarah said one evening as we sat on my back patio, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I feel more independent now than I ever did when Marcus was talking about independence. When you're truly free, you can choose your relationships instead of having them chosen for you." Sarah's doctoral program was going well. Her professors were impressed by her research into financial abuse patterns, and she was already being invited to speak at conferences about her work. She had turned her victimization into expertise that was helping other women. "I used to think that accepting help from family meant I was weak or dependent," she continued. "Marcus convinced me that healthy adults don't need support from their parents. But watching you fight for me, seeing how you used your resources and experience to save me, I realized that interdependence isn't the same as dependence." I reached over and touched my granddaughter's tiny hand. "Emma is going to grow up knowing that love isn't about control or manipulation. She'll learn that real love supports your growth and protects you when you can't protect yourself." The house Marcus and Sarah had bought was sold, and after paying off the fraudulent mortgage, I recovered almost all of my $69,000. But more importantly, I had recovered my daughter and gained a granddaughter. Sarah used her portion of the house proceeds to establish a trust fund for Emma's education, ensuring that her daughter would have opportunities regardless of whatever challenges life might bring. She also donated $10,000 to a nonprofit organization that helps women escape financial abuse. "I want Emma to understand that we have a responsibility to help other people when we can," she explained. "Not because we want to control them, but because that's what people do when they care about each other." The experience had changed both of us in fundamental ways. Sarah had learned to recognize manipulation and trust her own instincts. I had learned that sometimes protecting someone you love means risking their anger and rejection to tell them truths they don't want to hear. Our relationship was stronger than it had ever been built on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine communication, rather than the idealized but fragile connection we'd maintained when Sarah was younger. "Mom," Sarah said one day as we watched Emma discover her own hands, "I need you to promise me something." "What's that, honey?" "If I ever start making choices that seem destructive, or if someone comes into my life who tries to isolate me from family again, promise me you'll fight for me the way you did with Marcus, even if I get angry, even if I tell you to back off." "I promise," I said without hesitation, "but I also promise to respect your autonomy and trust your judgment. The difference is that now I know the warning signs of someone trying to manipulate both of us." Emma gurgled and reached toward the sunlight streaming through the window. She was going to grow up in a house filled with love, honesty, and the kind of support that empowers rather than controls. That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang. It was Jennifer calling with news about the civil lawsuit. "Christine, you're not going to believe this," she said excitedly. "Marcus's family settled the lawsuit for the full amount. Apparently, they're so horrified by what he did that they want to make sure all his victims are fully compensated." "That's wonderful news," I replied, though the money had long since stopped being the most important part of the story. "There's something else," Jennifer continued. "The FBI has opened an investigation into similar cases in other states. Marcus apparently wasn't working alone. They think there might be a whole network of people running these kinds of relationship fraud schemes." The idea that Marcus's exposure might lead to protecting other potential victims felt like the final piece of justice in our story. After I hung up with Jennifer, I checked on Sarah and Emma one more time before going to sleep. Sarah was reading in bed with Emma sleeping in the bassinet nearby. "Mom," she said softly, "thank you for not giving up on me." "Thank you for being worth fighting for," I replied. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I reflected on how much our lives had changed in such a short time. A year ago, I had been a lonely widow proud of my daughter's independence, but missing the closeness we had shared when she was younger. Now my house was full of laughter baby cries and the comfortable sounds of a family building a life together. Sarah was thriving in her doctoral program, using her experience to help other women recognize and escape financial abuse. Emma was growing stronger and more alert every day, and I had discovered that my greatest accomplishment wasn't the 40 years I spent as a nurse or the retirement savings I had accumulated, but the courage to fight for my daughter when she couldn't fight for herself. The most important lesson from our ordeal wasn't about recognizing manipulation or protecting assets. It was about the difference between love that empowers and love that controls. Real love doesn't require gratitude or obedience. It doesn't demand that people prove their worthiness or independence. Real love shows up fights when necessary and creates space for people to become their authentic selves. Marcus had tried to convince Sarah that my support was a form of control, that healthy adults don't need their families. But watching Sarah flourish with support, rather than in spite of it, proved that interdependence isn't weakness. It's strength multiplied. Emma will grow up understanding that accepting help doesn't make you weak, and that offering help doesn't give you the right to control someone's choices. She'll learn that the strongest families are the ones where people choose to support each other, not because they have to, but because they want to. Our story could have ended very differently. If I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I hadn't been willing to risk Sarah's anger to investigate what was happening, Marcus might have succeeded in his plan. Sarah would have been isolated, financially drained, and emotionally dependent on someone who was systematically destroying her life. Instead, she's building a career dedicated to helping other women escape similar situations. She's raising a daughter who will understand her own worth and trust her own judgment. And we've created a family based on honesty, respect, and the kind of love that empowers rather than controls. The most satisfying part of our victory wasn't Marcus's prison sentence or the financial recovery. It was watching Sarah reclaim her life, her relationships, and her sense of self. It was holding my granddaughter and knowing that she'll grow up surrounded by people who love her for who she is not, for what she can provide them. As I drifted off to sleep, I could hear Sarah humming softly to Emma in the next room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but we would face them together as a family that had been tested and emerged stronger. Have you ever had to fight for someone you love even when they couldn't see that they needed protecting? Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to give up on someone even when they've given up on themselves. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how families can support each other through difficult times while still respecting individual autonomy. Please like this story if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about resilience and family bonds. Share it with anyone who might benefit from Sarah's experience, and comment below with your own insights about recognizing and overcoming manipulation in relationships. Thank you for listening to our story, and remember that sometimes The best way to show love is to refuse to let someone you care about destroy their own life. Sweet dreams, and may you always have the courage to fight for what matters most.